Hello everyone and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers and I want to wish everybody a happy new year and wish you all the best in 2022. This is going to be a big year for the Rogers Brief, certainly with the Mass Casualty Commission hearings scheduled to start later this month. As we await for the hearings to start, and I must say I'm a little bit concerned that there will be further delays in the start based on the state of the coronavirus and the Omicron variant here in Nova Scotia. Certainly it's been just announced today that provincial courts are delaying in-person hearings for a few weeks. Jury trials have also been delayed in Nova Scotia, so we'll see how that affects things. The Desmond inquiry was supposed to restart on January 10th. That's been pushed back to the 24th now, so we'll see how this affects things, but in the meantime, I did want to give you some content. There's a couple of reports that have already been issued that cover some of the ground that is certainly going to be covered in the Mass Casualty Commission hearings, and these have been done so far in the form of Serious Incident Response Team reports. Serious Incident Response Team is SIRT, S-I-R-T, and that's an organization in Nova Scotia that's been around since 2010, and it examines situations where officers use their firearms or use force to determine if that was done properly, if there's any discipline that is recommended against the officer. So in the shooting that took place on April 18th and 19th of 2020, there were two such incidents. One took place at the Onslow Fire Hall, which is near Truro, between Portapique and Truro, and the other, of course, was the final moments at the big stop in Enfield. So there are two reports. The Onslow report was issued just this year, February 26, 2021. The report from the big stop was issued in December of 2020. So what is the Serious Incident Response Team? Well, maybe I'll start there. This is, as I said, an organization. It's civilian-led that investigates police conduct. It was initially led by Ron McDonald, QC, who's a lawyer out of Antigonish, a prosecutor who's now moved on to the same job essentially in British Columbia. Ron was a friend of mine, a mentor and a colleague in Antigonish, and a lot of respect for him and the job he did with SIRT when that was just getting it off the ground. It's now led by retired Supreme Court Justice Felix Cacchione. Justice Cacchione was on the bench for over 30 years. Before that, he had developed a very good reputation as a lawyer, including representing Donald Marshall Jr. For a time. I knew Justice Cacchione, haven't appeared in front of him for a trial, but I was in a trial of sorts, which was during law school. I volunteered to be the accused. A friend of mine had asked me, who was taking criminal trial practice with Justice Cacchione's wife, Judge Barbara Beach, if I would volunteer to be the accused, which was a fun experience in its own way. Justice Cacchione was the judge, and we did a full-on mock trial with the students taking turns being lawyers, and in fact we had journalism students there as well covering it, so it was quite a thing, and I got to meet Justice Cacchione and have a lot of respect for him over the years. So having said all that, there are some problems with these two reports and some contradictions that I think will need to be resolved during the Mass Casualty Commission hearings. So today I'm going to talk about the report dealing with the Onslow Fire Hall, and in a couple of days I'll issue another video and blog piece talking about the big stop in Enfield and the final moments of the situation last year. So the Onslow Fire Hall, just to orient ourselves, is between Portapique and Truro. It's closer to Truro, but on the old highway going through there. It's a large building, 3-bay garage, and a large center otherwise. And this was being used actually the morning of the 19th of April last year as a warming center or a gathering center for those evacuees from Portapique. And so what happened, the very basics of it, was that an RCMP, two RCMP officers in a vehicle, an unmarked Nissan Altima, stopped outside the Onslow Fire Hall, looked in, saw a marked police cruiser and a person standing next to it wearing a reflective vest. They thought that that was the killer, Gabriel Wortman, and opened fire on the person. They fortunately, as it turned out, didn't hit the person because it wasn't Gabriel Wortman, it was another police officer, and in fact there was an EMO officer standing next to the police officer, some civilians inside the building who just missed getting hit. So the SIRT report cleared the officers of certainly of criminal responsibility. It says that they knew that Gabriel Wortman was wearing a reflective vest, that he was dressed as a police officer, had a replica police vehicle, and that because radio traffic was so heavy at the time, they were unable to get instructions or confirm the presence, and so it didn't allow them to check with anyone. And in a key fact that was found by Justice Cacchione is that the officers yelled out instructions to the person they suspected as being Wortman to raise his hand, show their hands, but instead that the person ducked behind a police vehicle. So that's when the report says they opened fire. So if this is true, if we take that all to be true, then this would be described perhaps as a terrible but understandable mistake by perhaps inexperienced, over-exuberant officers. However, and that is what the report concluded. Well, it didn't say inexperienced or over-exuberant, but basically that's what it concluded, that it was a mistake. However, eyewitnesses have emerged, including neighbors. There were some houses just surrounding this fire hall, and also two vehicles that passed by, including one person who was driving a Toyota Prius, an electric vehicle that wasn't making any noise, had the windows down. And these eyewitnesses have, and actually also an eyewitness, or another witness, was the deputy fire chief who did a sort of a reenactment to show some of the sight lines and some of those problems. The eyewitnesses say that no instructions were shouted out by these officers to the suspect. So that's one key distinction or contradiction. And the deputy fire chief showed a reporter how if you approach from the western side of the fire hall, that the sight lines don't allow you to see in advance who's in the fire hall parking lot, particularly to the detail that you would require to presume that's the killer that's dressed as the right person and start discharging your firearm. So there's some problems with both parts of the accounts from the police officers. So there's certainly some contradictions there that the Mass Casualty Commission is going to need to resolve. Another thing that I think is going to have to come up during the commission hearings, and it wasn't mentioned at all in the SIRT report, is the aftermath. So the officers just left. Although there's some allegation that they stayed for a while and parked out on the road and then left. But the report doesn't address this, because if it was in fact Gabriel Wortman, then certainly the officers should have pursued the suspect. And if it wasn't, as it turned out it wasn't, well then they should have gone into the building to check on civilians, check on the other victims to make sure everybody was okay. None of that happened, and none of that was explained either. So that'll have to come up and be resolved in the Mass Casualty Commission hearing, certainly. There's another theory, and it's arisen because there's a few other facts. One is that Gabriel Wortman had in fact passed by that very spot about 10 to 12 minutes prior to these two police officers showing up. And also that the police officers seem to have taken the initial shots from a greater distance than you might expect from a shootout. That they were behind cover, shooting through an LED light stand that's out at the roadway. This seems wild to imagine, but the allegation or the suggestion is that lines up with these facts is that these officers may have been told by somebody prior to arriving that Gabriel Wortman was there at the Onslow Fire Hall. And further, it seems also possible, and matches the facts, known that that person that informed them was Gabriel Wortman himself. And now the police have denied that Gabriel Wortman was communicating with them or had any association with the RCMP, but signs seem to be pointing in that direction. There's other details that I'm going to talk about in the next video dealing with the shooting at the Big Stop, the final scene from this incident, that line up and connect some of these dots as well. And we'll come back to that in a few days. So, as I say, thank you for listening, and we'll be back to talk more about the SIRT reports in a couple of days, and we'll see you then.